Hey everyone, and welcome to the PivotBoss Closing Report for February 23rd, 2016. I am Frank Ochoa with your analysis for the current session here. Taking a look at the ES in the daily time frame. The first thing that stands out, obviously, we have a very narrow 4-day range that's built out here. It's very typical of what happens after price drops into a rejection point and then rallies back toward an area with an HVN here. You typically see price come back toward value and chop around and then digest that recent move. And after that digestion here, this is building fuel now for the next potential move. Right now, the way that prices are being rejected above the 39.5, we could be looking at another push back down within the range back toward 1800 to 1814. So we've been in this trading range now since early January, back and forth, and now again, this is what I mentioned before. After price rallied into this zone, I mentioned we want to be very careful to watch to see how price and the market responds to these prices above this zone, because if there's any rejection above 39.5, the current key range midpoint, or at 50.5, the August midpoint, that would suggest a rotation back downward. Acceptance beyond 50.5 would open the doors to a much bigger push back toward recent key levels here, 2007 and 2075. So we'll continue to watch this very closely, but right now on a 4-day range basis, the PivotBoss Advanced ADR indicator is telling us that this is less than 65% of average range on a typical 4-day range basis, and that suggests that we could be looking at expansion very soon, so watch the edges closely. If we take a look at the intraday time frame, you can see here prices basically pushed lower. What we were looking for the previous session here was how was price going to respond after it reached the 1939.5, and you can see it was very sluggish getting any kind of traction above that zone. Then it dropped off, and back here we've seen nothing but defenses off that zone before we saw further downside expansion. So I mentioned before, this could be the beginning of what could be a steady roll down ahead. Now if price bounces back higher, we could be looking at a retest of this zone and looking for bears to redefend here for a push much lower here. So this is a key zone to watch out for. Obviously, 5-day VPOC is going to be important. That area was bid, and then it took it over here and took it offered. So if you take 5-day VPOC offered 23s, that would suggest a push back into 5-day value low, 1904 half at the moment. So something to watch out for as we head into overnight trading. Taking a look at crude oil. Here's crude oil. Very similar to the ES, what we're seeing here is basically price is forming a very narrow multi-day range. And this range also on a 4 or 5-day basis here is narrow compared to average. It's less than 65% of average daily range, which tells us it's super compressed. We also know 3102, very important, the previous week's low, the previous week's high, 3421. That's basically the zone to really watch. We also got to keep an eye on the HVN here, which is micro composite VPOC at 3365. So far, that's been offered. So you see lots of bears defending in this zone, and that tells you that the bears are heavily positioned to the downside here. So if price pops above that 3421, you could see significant buy stops that come up, which point you back into 3781. So we got to see whichever way it breaks out of this range, it should spark the next key move. Given the current downtrending price structure here, it wouldn't be out of the point here to think that we could drop to new lows given how this thing has transpired. Again, expansion from this range will tell us. Now, if we take a look at the intraday time frame, this one was important mainly because of how price went offered at value early in the session. Overnight here, and then again pre-market during this session right there, when offered. And I mentioned before, if 5-day VPOC is going to be offered here, that would suggest a push down to the bottom of value, and we reached the bottom of 5-day value. It's since updated ever since we got new activity, but we did reach the bottom of 5-day value in addition to reaching our primary bear target at 3188 and at 3175, which was a 5-day HVN. So that pre-market idea here came to fruition very nicely, and now you see prices are below the previous week's close price. So that's going to be important. Any acceptance back above 3211 would suggest a return to previous 5-day value. Otherwise, staying below this zone would open up more of a pullback below, And again, we know below 31.02 opens up significant weakness below the previous week's low here. So something to look out for. We also have the key range here to watch out for. 31.46 would be the 100% target to reach for. But if that target is reached, you're likely going to see further expansion anyway. All right, taking a look at gold now. Here's gold in a daily time frame. Obviously, we saw that big time short squeeze to the upside. Big blow off top here. Extreme reversal pattern put us right back into 1192s, and now we're just kind of digestion. You know, it's just kind of a digestion phase now where everything is just the market kind of trading back and forth here. You're seeing a little bit of action coming in here where it's starting to build a little bit of acceptance. Any failure to hold above the recent low of 92s, and especially composite VPOC at 1196 half, that failure to hold there would likely run stops all the way to 1126 with the quickness. So that's going to be important. Defending this zone here, even as low as 1180. 1180 was a big time LVN for us to watch out for here. It's still in play. So even if price comes into 1180, this could be a zone where bulls pick the ball back up and return it back toward 1240. So keep an eye on this range as it develops. I would say 1196 half is the big time level there. If that goes off it points to the next HVN below. Keeping it bid would suggest further trading range activity. Let's take a look at the NQ. Here's the NQ in a daily time frame here. We can see prices have been trending lower. We've since seen the pullback to our primary target. No bones about this one at all. 38.93 half. Failure to hold below that level opened up a move into 42.26, and we've yet to really see acceptance beyond that zone. Now we have a 4-day range that's super, super narrow here. That 4-day narrow range right there on the PivotBoss ADR indicator, it's telling us it's less than 65% of average 4-day range. So what that means is it's a compressed state right now. We could be looking at expansion ahead. A breakout in either direction would suggest a nice move. But I would say right now, if this thing breaks to the upside, be very careful because, we've been in a downtrending market. All areas in this zone up here into 42.87 and as high as 43.09 have been rejected. So if we break this thing to the upside, there's a possibility of seeing some sort of trap that leads to an eventual push downward. If we break this thing to the downside cleanly, we're likely just dropping anyways. So right now, that's the type of market we're in. We're in a downtrending market. So we have to watch for those traps up top, and we have to be looking to fade for a push back down. But again, this range will tell us direction. Looking at the intraday time frame for the NQ, a nice downtrending market overall. One thing about this market was early on, price formed this impulse move the previous afternoon down into the overnight low here. And then bounced back up and kind of formed a neutral key range here and then took that range to the downside. Price dropped into the previous week's close, 41.61. That was also prior 5-day VPOC and the 50% expansion, and that's kind of where we stayed. But overall, failure to get beyond 42.26 and that 42.27 half, which was the previous week's high, was very telling the previous week. And I mentioned before, failure to see acceptance above that zone could open up a move back into this area, and that's exactly what we've seen. So today was all about making that come to fruition, and now we'll see how this thing plays out from there. Because if there's any hold basically above value here, if this area goes bid, we could be looking at a push back toward prior 5-day VPOC, 42.05s. Otherwise, we're probably heading lower into 41.30 and perhaps below. All right, that's it for now. Let's see how this thing plays out heading into the upcoming session. Good luck and trade well.